Decoded, The Science Behind Why We Buy, by Phil Barden. Introduction. Have you ever seen an advertisement so strange, so completely out of left field, that you couldn't forget it? Back in 2007, the chocolate company Cadbury released one just like that. There were no smiling families, no slow-motion shots of chocolate pouring. Instead, for 90 surreal seconds, we watched a gorilla. Just a gorilla, sitting in a studio, looking thoughtful as the moody opening of a Phil Collins song began to play. The tension builds. And then, at the song's famous drum break, the gorilla erupts into a passionate, powerful drum solo. It's bizarre. It's captivating. And at the very end, the Cadbury logo appears with the tagline, "A glass and a half full of joy." The ad was a phenomenon. It went viral before going viral was a common phrase. Sales for Cadbury, which had been flat for years, shot up by nearly 10%. Everyone was talking about it. The client was thrilled. So, naturally, they ordered a sequel. They used the same brilliant agency, the same director, the same strategy, and the same budget. The follow-up ad featured a group of airport trucks racing each other on a runway to a Queen song. It was flashy, it was fun. And it completely flopped. Why? Why did one ad connect so deeply with millions, while its successor, made with the exact same ingredients for success, failed to make a ripple? This is the kind of mystery that haunts businesses, costing them billions of dollars every year. And it's the kind of mystery that drove a man named Phil Barden, a senior marketer who had spent 25 years at the top of giants like Unilever, Diageo, and T-Mobile, to realize that everything he thought he knew about why people buy things was wrong. Or at the very least, incomplete. He saw that the marketing world was operating on an old map, a map that showed a world where consumers are rational, where they make logical decisions, and where you can simply ask them what they want and they'll give you a straight answer. But his experience told him that the real world was a far stranger, more mysterious, and more fascinating place. The book we're exploring today, Decoded, is the new map. It's not based on opinions or old-school theories, it's built on the bedrock of modern decision science, neuroscience, behavioral economics, and psychology. Barden didn't just write a book, he created a guide to the hidden operating system of the human mind. And here is my promise to you. By the end of our time together, you will understand that hidden system. You will see that inside your mind, right now, are two different beings making your decisions. One you know well, and one you've likely never met. You will learn the simple, secret equation that determines every single purchase you make, from a pack of gum to a new car. And you will gain a kind of superpower, the ability to see the invisible signals all around you that are constantly shaping your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. This isn't just about marketing, it's about understanding the very science of why we do what we do. Book summary. So, let's begin our journey into the mind. To understand the core lesson of Decoded, you first have to accept a profound truth, one that was so revolutionary it won a psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize in Economics. The truth is this: you are not one mind. You are two. Imagine your mind as a sophisticated aircraft. There's the pilot. This is the part of you that you're familiar with. It's your conscious awareness. It's the voice in your head that thinks, that analyzes, that makes plans and solves difficult problems. The pilot is slow, careful, and deliberate. It requires a lot of energy to operate. It's the part of you that's listening to my voice right now, trying to understand these concepts. But the pilot, for all its intelligence, has an incredibly limited capacity. Scientists estimate it can only process about 40 bits of information per second. That's barely enough to remember a phone number. But then, there's the autopilot. The autopilot is the real captain of the ship. It's your unconscious mind, a silent, powerful system that is always on, always running in the background. It's incredibly fast, intuitive, and effortless. And its processing power is staggering. While the pilot is struggling with 40 bits of information, the autopilot is effortlessly handling around 11 million bits of information every single second. Everything you see, hear, smell, touch, it all flows into the autopilot. Think about the first time you learned to drive a car. Remember how overwhelming it was? Your pilot was working overtime. Checking the mirrors, steering, braking, listening to the instructor. It was exhausting. You were slow, clumsy, and deliberate. Now think about driving to a place you know well. You get there and sometimes you barely remember the journey. Who was driving? The autopilot. It was navigating traffic, stopping at red lights, and making hundreds of micro-decisions, all while your pilot was free to think about your day, listen to music, or talk to a passenger. This is the first fundamental secret from Decoded. The vast majority of our decisions, especially our purchase decisions, are not made by the slow, logical pilot. They are made by the fast, intuitive, and immensely powerful autopilot. For decades, marketers talked to the pilot. They filled their ads with facts, figures, and reasons to buy. They assumed the consumer would sit there, weigh the pros and cons, and make a rational choice. But Barden reveals this is like shouting instructions at the passenger of a plane, while the real pilot is in a soundproof cockpit, flying by its own set of rules. So, what are the autopilot's rules? The first rule is that the autopilot learns through simple association. Barden uses a beautiful phrase to describe this, borrowed from neuroscience: what fires together, wires together. The autopilot doesn't learn from textbooks, it learns from patterns. When you were a child, the first time you heard the word no, it was just a sound. But then it was said with a louder voice. Then with a stern look on your mother's face. Then it was followed by a toy being taken away. Slowly, all those signals, the sound, the tone, the face, the action, fired together in your brain. And eventually, they wired together. You learn the meaning of no without ever looking it up in a dictionary. This is how brands are built in our minds. Think of the brand O2, the mobile phone company. Their advertising for years featured beautiful, slow-motion bubbles floating against a serene blue background. They did it again, and again, and again. The bubbles, the blue color, and the O2 logo all fired together. Now, their associative memory is so strong that they can show an ad with just the bubbles and the blue, and your autopilot instantly knows it's O2, even without seeing the logo. The connection is wired in. The autopilot is constantly scanning the world for these patterns, these learned signals. But here's the really mind-bending part. It doesn't see the world like a high-definition camera. In fact, it sees the world mostly in a blur. Our eyes only have a tiny spot in the center, called the fovea, that sees in sharp focus and full color. Everything else, our peripheral vision, is blurry and less colorful. This blurry input is what the autopilot uses to navigate the world. Imagine standing in the supermarket aisle, looking for detergent. You're not reading every label. Your autopilot is scanning the blurry shapes and colors on the shelf, looking for what Barden calls diagnostic cues. It's looking for the familiar orange of a Tide bottle, or the green and red shape of an Ariel box. It doesn't need to read the words, it recognizes the pattern. This is why, as Barden points out, a brand's packaging is so incredibly important. He gives the example of dental antiseptic wipes versus a store's own brand. When you blur the images of the two packages, they look remarkably similar. The same white, green, and blue colors, the same swirling graphic. For the autopilot, there's no clear difference. The store brand is piggybacking on the diagnostic cues of the leading brand, and in that split second of decision, that can be enough to win the sale. This leads us to perhaps the most powerful concept in the entire book, the idea of framing. Look at a classic optical illusion. Two identical gray squares, one placed inside a black box and the other inside a light gray box. The gray square in the black box looks much lighter than the one in the light gray box. But they are objectively the exact same color. Our brain doesn't see things in isolation, it sees them in context. The background, the frame, changes our perception of the thing in the foreground. Barden argues that this is exactly how brands work. A brand is not a product. A brand is a frame. Think about Starbucks. When you pay $3 or $4 for a coffee, are you just buying coffee beans and hot water? Of course not. You could buy a whole jar of coffee for that price. You're buying the frame that Starbucks provides. The warm lighting, the comfortable chairs, the smell of coffee, the world music playing in the background. All these signals create a frame that Barden calls a short holiday. It's that moment of escape, that third place between home and work. The product is the coffee, but the frame is the experience. And it's the frame that justifies the premium price. The frame increases the perceived value of the product. This is the true meaning of brand equity. It's not some fluffy marketing term, it's a tangible neurological effect. The frame created by the brand literally changes how your brain experiences the product. In one incredible study, researchers gave people the exact same wine to drink on two different occasions. The first time, they told them it was a $10 bottle. The second time, they told them it was an $80 bottle. People didn't just say the $80 wine tasted better. Brain scans showed that the pleasure centers in their brains lit up significantly more when they thought they were drinking the expensive wine. The price was a frame that changed the physical experience of taste. So we have these two minds, the pilot and the autopilot. The autopilot learns through association, sees the world in a blur, and is powerfully influenced by frames. But how does this all come together in that crucial moment, the moment you decide to actually buy something? Barden calls this the moment of truth. And he boils it down to a simple, elegant equation based on groundbreaking neuroscience. A neuroscientist named Brian Knudsen put people in a brain scanner and showed them products they might want to buy, like a box of chocolates. When a person saw the product, a part of their brain called the reward system lit up. It's the part of the brain that says, "I want this. This is the reward." Then, he showed them the price of the product. When the price appeared, a completely different part of the brain activated, the insula. This is the part of the brain that processes pain. The shocking discovery was that, to our autopilot, price isn't a number. Price is pain. It's the pain of giving something up. So, the purchase decision is a battle in the brain between reward and pain. And the final choice is determined by a simple calculation. Net value equals reward, pain. If the expected reward is greater than the perceived pain, you buy. If the pain is greater than the reward, you don't. Every single purchase decision you make is governed by this simple, primitive logic. And this is where marketing comes in. The entire job of marketing, Barden explains, is to manage this equation. There are only two ways to influence a sale. You can either increase the perception of reward, or you can decrease the perception of pain. Let's look at how the masters do it. How do you increase the reward? You can do it explicitly, by talking about the product's features. But as we've seen, that's talking to the pilot. The real magic happens when you increase the implicit reward by sending the right signals to the autopilot. Barden gives the fantastic example of Adidas's dynamic pulse shower gel. At a functional level, it's just soap. But look at the packaging. The bottle is shaped a bit like a can of motor oil, with a grippy texture. The name is Dynamic Pulse. The cap makes a satisfying click when it opens. Every single signal is designed to communicate concepts like power, energy, and refueling. For a man who wants his morning shower to be a kickstart to his day, this product offers a much higher implicit reward than a generic bottle of soap. It's not just cleaning his body, it's framing the experience as an act of revitalization. Language is another powerful tool. In one study, a restaurant menu described a dish as succulent Italian seafood fillet. Another menu just called it seafood fillet. It was the exact same dish. But the one with a descriptive, flowery language was ordered more often, and people actually rated it as tasting better. The words created a frame of expectation that increased the reward. Now, how do you decrease the pain? You could lower the price, of course. But that's a race to the bottom. A much cleverer way is to change the perception of the price. This is where the idea of anchoring comes in. When Steve Jobs first introduced the iPad, he spent a long time talking about its incredible features. Then he asked, "What should we price it at?" Behind him on the screen, a giant number appeared: $999. He let that number sink in for a moment. He anchored the audience's perception of the price at a high level. Then he said, "I am thrilled to announce that the iPad pricing starts not at $999, but at just $499. On screen, the $999 was dramatically crushed by a falling $499. The crowd went wild. The final price of $499 didn't feel like a cost, it felt like a huge bargain. The pain was dramatically reduced because of the anchor. But pain isn't just about money. Barden highlights that there are also behavioral costs: the effort, time, and friction involved in making a purchase. He tells the legendary story of the $300 million button. A major e-commerce website was losing countless sales. They couldn't figure out why. It turned out the problem was on their checkout page. Before customers could buy, they had to register for an account. It was a simple form, but for first-time buyers, it was a hurdle. It was a behavioral cost. They just wanted to buy the item, not enter into a relationship with the company. A designer made a simple change. He replaced the register button with a continue button, and added a simple message: "You do not need to create an account to make purchases on our site." The results were explosive. Sales increased by 45%. In the first year alone, that simple change generated an additional $300 million in revenue. They didn't change the product. They didn't change the price. They just reduced the behavioral pain at the moment of decision. So far, we've explored the how our two minds work, how brands act as frames, and how the net value equation governs our choices. But there's a deeper question we need to answer. The why. Why do we want certain things in the first place? What makes a reward rewarding? This brings us to the final, and most profound, layer of Decoded: the power of goals. Barden argues that products and brands are simply tools. They are instruments that we hire to do a job for us. The famous Harvard professor Theodore Levitt once said, "People don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill. They want a quarter-inch hole. The drill is the product. The hole is the goal." To truly understand why people buy, you have to understand the job they are trying to get done. He shares a brilliant story from another Harvard professor, Clayton Christensen. A fast food chain wanted to sell more milkshakes. They did all the typical marketing things. They asked customers what they wanted: thicker, chocolatier, cheaper. They made the changes, and nothing happened to sales. Finally, they took a different approach. They sent researchers to just watch people who bought milkshakes. What they found was fascinating. A huge number of milkshakes were sold in the early morning, to people who were by themselves, and got in their cars and drove away. When they interviewed these people, they discovered the job they were hiring the milkshake to do. The job was to make a long, boring commute to work more interesting. They needed something they could consume with one hand, something that would take a long time to finish, and something that would stave off hunger until lunchtime. When you look at it that way, what was the milkshake's real competition? It wasn't other milkshakes. It was bagels, bananas, and donuts. But the bagel was messy and hard to eat while driving. The banana was gone in 2 minutes. The milkshake, however, was perfect for the job. It was neat, it took 20 minutes to suck through a thin straw, and it was filling. The milkshake wasn't just a drink, it was an instrument to achieve the goal of a less boring commute. Once the company understood this, the path to improving the product was obvious. They made the milkshake even thicker, so it lasted longer. They added tiny chunks of fruit to create an element of surprise and discovery along the way. And they moved the milkshake dispenser to the front of the counter with a self-service machine, so commuters could get in and out quickly, reducing the behavioral cost. Sales skyrocketed. Barden reveals that our goals operate on 2 levels. There are explicit goals. These are the functional, category-level jobs. A detergent's explicit goal is to get clothes clean. A car's explicit goal is to provide transportation. These are the quarter-inch holes. To even compete in a market, you have to be able to do this job well. But the real source of differentiation and deep connection lies in the implicit goals. These are the deeper, psychological, emotional needs we are trying to satisfy. We don't just buy a car for transportation. We might buy a Volvo to achieve the implicit goal of security, or a BMW to achieve the implicit goal of excitement, or a Mercedes to achieve the implicit goal of autonomy and status. These implicit goals are universal and deeply rooted in our evolutionary past. Barden, drawing on the latest neuroscience, identifies 3 core motivational systems, which he calls the Big Three. 1. Security. This is our drive for safety, comfort, togetherness, and the avoidance of danger. It's the feeling of being cared for. Brands like Dove, with its Real Beauty campaign featuring groups of supportive women, tap into this powerful need for relief and belonging. 2. Autonomy. This is our drive for power, superiority, achievement, and winning. It's about overcoming obstacles and being in control. The Metabo power drill ad that shows drills arranged like weapons with the headline "Concrete needs opponents, not victims" is a pure, unapologetic appeal to this goal. 3. Excitement. This is our drive for discovery, curiosity, creativity, and change. It's the need to break free from the familiar and avoid boredom. The success of the Apple iPhone wasn't just about the technology, it was about how you interacted with it. The flicking, scrolling, and tapping gestures were not just functional, they were implicitly linked to concepts of play, surprise, and entertainment, perfectly serving the excitement goal. The greatest brands, Barden shows, are the ones that masterfully intertwine the explicit and the implicit. They deliver on the functional promise of the category, but they win our hearts and our wallets by connecting that promise to a deeper psychological goal. Let's go back to where we started, the Cadbury Gorilla. Why did it work? Because it was a perfect translation of Cadbury's core goals. The explicit goal of chocolate is enjoyment and taste. But Cadbury's implicit territory has always been about security, comfort, and a kind of gentle, personal indulgence, that glass and a half of creamy milk. The Gorilla ad, with its quiet, personal moment of anticipation followed by an explosion of pure, uninhibited joy, was a brilliant metaphor for that exact feeling. It was strange, yes, but it felt right on a deep, implicit level. The trucks ad, on the other hand, was all about competition, speed, and aggression, the world of autonomy and adventure. It was an exciting ad, but it didn't connect with the core goals that people hire Cadbury chocolate to achieve. The signals were misaligned with the brand's soul. And this is the final, crucial lesson of Decoded. To build a successful brand or communicate an idea effectively, you must close what Barden calls the implementation gap. Your strategy must be built on a deep understanding of the consumer's explicit and implicit goals. And every single execution, every package design, every advertisement, every button on your website, must be a credible and tangible signal that brings that goal to life for the autopilot. The signals must be baked in. He gives the example of Coors Light beer, whose proposition is refreshment as cold as the Rockies. That's a great line, but it's just a claim. What makes it credible is the innovation on their packaging. The mountains on the label literally turn blue when the beer reaches the perfect cold temperature. The promise is made tangible. The autopilot doesn't have to believe the words, it can see the proof. That is marketing at its most powerful. Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through Decoded, I find myself reflecting on just how profoundly this way of thinking changes your perspective. It's like being given a special pair of glasses that lets you see the hidden architecture of the world. The most powerful lesson, for me, is the humbling realization of how little control our conscious mind, our pilot, really has. We like to think of ourselves as rational, logical beings, thoughtfully making our way through life. But Barden, with the full force of science behind him, shows us that we are largely guided by this powerful, intuitive, and ancient autopilot. It's not that we're irrational, it's that we operate on a different kind of logic, a neurologic of association, framing, reward, and pain. This isn't a cynical view of humanity. In fact, I find it incredibly liberating. It explains so much about our own behavior that can otherwise be baffling. Why do we say we want to save money, but then make an impulse purchase? Why do we stick with a brand we know, even when a new one might be better? It's the autopilot, seeking immediate rewards, avoiding the pain of loss, and trusting its learned patterns. Understanding this doesn't just make you a better marketer, it makes you more empathetic and understanding of human nature itself. What I also love about this book is how practical it is. It's not just abstract theory. It gives you a toolkit for seeing the world differently and for making better decisions. So, I want to leave you with a few simple ways you can start applying these ideas in your own life, starting today. First, the next time you find yourself about to buy something, anything at all, just pause for a second and ask yourself that powerful question. What job am I hiring this product to do? Are you buying that expensive coffee for the caffeine, the explicit goal, or for that 15-minute moment of peace and escape, the implicit goal? Understanding the real why behind your own choices is the first step to mastering them. Second, become a decoder of your own environment. When you see an advertisement on TV or a product on a shelf, try to look at it through the eyes of your autopilot. Blur your vision slightly. What signals stand out? The shape? The color? What deep universal goal is it trying to connect with? Is it promising security, autonomy, or excitement? You'll start to see the hidden language of marketing everywhere, and it's a fascinating game to play. And finally, just start noticing your autopilot in action. Pay attention to those gut feelings, those intuitive pulls toward one choice over another. Don't judge them, just observe them. By bringing a gentle awareness to these unconscious processes, you begin to build a bridge between your two minds, becoming a more integrated and self-aware person. That was a summary of Decoded, The Science Behind Why We Buy, by Phil Barden. We've walked through the key ideas together today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary is like looking at a travel brochure. It can show you the beautiful pictures, but it can never replace the feeling of actually taking the journey yourself. The real magic of this book is in the quiet moments of reading, when a particular story or a simple phrase connects with your own experience and a light bulb goes on in your mind. This summary is your map, designed to help you decide if this is a journey worth taking. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity, I truly encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself, other people, and the world around you. Also, if you found this journey valuable, it would mean the world to me if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.